Marcus Chen had been staring at the same readout for 3 hours when the impossible happened. The deep space monitoring station he called home for the past 2 years suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree, every sensor screaming warnings that something massive was approaching Earth's outer perimeter. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, his coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. The readings didn't make sense. The object was huge, easily the size of a small moon, and it had appeared out of nowhere. No acceleration curve, no heat signature from engines, nothing that would indicate how it had arrived in their solar system. His training kicked in immediately. Marcus's fingers flew across the control panel, initiating emergency protocols and sending automated distress signals to Earth Command. As a former Marine turned deep space technician, he'd seen his share of unexplained phenomena, but this was different. This felt intentional. The massive object began to slow as it approached his station, and Marcus realized with growing horror that it wasn't slowing down enough to avoid a collision. He was reaching for the evacuation pod controls when his entire console went dark, then flickered back to life, displaying symbols he'd never seen before. "Greetings, warrior of Earth," a voice said in perfect English, though it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We require your assistance." Marcus looked around his small control room, half expecting to find someone standing behind him. "Who is this? How are you accessing my systems?" "I am Kethvar, first advisor to the Royal House of Zephyria. We have been observing your species for some time, and our analysis indicates you possess qualities we desperately need." The main display screen shimmered and resolved into the image of what could only be described as a humanoid alien. Kethvar stood nearly 7 feet tall, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. His features were sharp and angular, but somehow noble. Most striking were his eyes, which appeared to be solid silver and seemed to look directly at Marcus despite the obvious impossibility. "You've got the wrong guy," Marcus said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "I'm just a monitoring tech. If you want to talk to someone important, you need to contact Earth Command." Kethvar's expression remained serious. "We have observed your military records, Marcus Chen. Your actions during the Titan colony crisis, your leadership under impossible odds, your ability to protect those under your command even at great personal cost. These are the qualities we seek." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The Titan colony incident wasn't public knowledge. 3 years ago, he'd been part of a classified mission to evacuate a research station when a reactor malfunction threatened to destroy the entire facility. He'd stayed behind to ensure the last transport could escape, nearly dying in the process. "How do you know about that?" "As I said, we have been observing. Our realm faces a threat that our traditional forces cannot handle. We need someone who thinks differently, someone who can adapt and overcome impossible situations. Our royal twins require protection, and our analysis indicates you are uniquely qualified to provide it." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want me to be a bodyguard?" "I'm flattered, but I'm not exactly in the personal protection business anymore." The display flickered, and suddenly, Marcus was looking at 2 young women who took his breath away. They appeared human at first glance, but their skin had the same subtle luminescence as Kethvar's, and their hair seemed to shift between silver and gold in the light. Most striking were their eyes, one sister with eyes like emeralds, the other with eyes like sapphires. "These are Princess Lyrelii and Princess Cerelii," Kethvar's voice continued. "Twin heirs to the throne of Zephyria. 3 days ago, an ancient enemy breached our realm's defenses. Our greatest warriors have fallen, our magical barriers have been shattered, and conventional tactics have proven useless against this foe." Marcus studied the images of the princesses. They looked young, maybe early 20s in human terms, but there was something in their expressions that suggested they'd seen far more than their years should allow. "What kind of enemy are we talking about?" "The Vortak," Kethvar said, and even through the transmission, Marcus could hear the fear in his voice. "An parasitic race that consumes life force itself. They adapt to our magic, counter our technology, and corrupt everything they touch. Our greatest minds believe that only an outsider, someone whose thinking patterns they cannot predict, might find a way to defeat them." "And you think that outsider is me?" "We know it is you. Our seers have looked across countless possibilities, countless potential champions. In every scenario where our realm survives, you are the key. Marcus set down his coffee mug and rubbed his temples. This was insane. Aliens asking him to save princess he'd never met from enemies he couldn't understand. But something in Kethvar's tone, something in the way those silver eyes seemed to look right through him, made him believe this wasn't an elaborate hoax. What exactly are you asking me to do? Come with us to Zephyria. Accept the role of royal protector to the twin princesses. Help us find a way to defeat the Vorthak before they consume our entire realm. And if I refuse? Kethvar's expression grew grim. Then, in approximately 72 hours, the Vorthak will breach our final defenses and reach the royal palace. The princesses will die, our realm will fall, and the enemy will turn their attention to other worlds. Worlds like Earth. Marcus felt his blood run cold. They'd come here? Life force is their sustenance. Earth, with its billions of inhabitants, would be an irresistible target. We are not just asking you to save our realm, Marcus-chan. We are asking you to save your own. The weight of the decision pressed down on Marcus like a physical thing. He looked around his small control room, at the life he'd built for himself after leaving the military. It wasn't much, but it was peaceful. Safe. The idea of throwing that away to venture into an alien realm to fight parasitic monsters seemed like madness. But then, he thought about Earth, about the billions of people who had no idea they might be facing an extinction-level threat. He thought about his sister Sarah and her kids, about all the innocent people who would suffer if these Vorthak ever reached their world. If I agree, he said slowly, what exactly would I be getting into? What does being a royal protector mean? You would be bonded to the princesses through ancient magic, Kethvar explained. This bond would enhance your natural abilities and allow you to sense threats to their safety. You would have access to our technology and resources, and full authority to take whatever actions you deem necessary to keep them safe. Bonded how? Kethvar hesitated for the first time. The details are complex. The bond is both mystical and deeply personal. It connects not just your life force to theirs, but your very essence. Breaking such a bond, once formed, is difficult. Marcus caught the evasion. You're not telling me everything. There are aspects of the bond that are best explained once you arrive. What I can tell you is that it will not harm you, and it will give you the power you need to protect them effectively. Warning bells were going off in Marcus's head, but he pushed them aside. Whatever this bond entailed, it couldn't be worse than watching his world burn. How long do I have to decide? We must leave within the hour if we are to return before the Vorthak's final assault begins. An hour. Marcus looked around his control room again, then, at the image of the twin princesses on his screen. Something about their faces called to him, something beyond their obvious beauty. They looked lost, frightened, despite their royal bearing. They needed help, and, apparently, he was the only one who could provide it. If I do this, he said, I want guarantees. I want your word that you'll do everything in your power to get me back to Earth safely once this threat is dealt with. You have my word, Kethvar replied immediately. Though I should warn you, the bonding process may make leaving more complicated than you might expect. There it was again, that evasion. Marcus made a mental note to press for details later. Right now, he had a decision to make, and, despite every instinct screaming at him that this was insane, he knew what his answer had to be. I'll need to send a message to Earth Command, let them know I'm going dark for a while. That can be arranged. Marcus took a deep breath. Then, I guess I'm in. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur. Marcus packed what few personal belongings he thought might be useful, sent a carefully worded message to his superiors explaining he'd been recruited for a classified long-term mission, and tried not to think too hard about what he was agreeing to. When the transport beam enveloped him, Marcus felt a moment of pure terror as his consciousness seemed to stretch across impossible distances. Then, he was standing in what could only be described as a throne room from a fairy tale, if fairy tales included holographic displays and walls that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. Welcome to Zephyria, Kethvar said, and Marcus realized the alien looked even more imposing in person. The princesses are waiting to meet you. Marcus followed Kethvar through corridors that defied physics, past windows that showed alien skies filled with 3 moons and nebulae that painted everything in soft pastels. Servants and guards they passed looked human enough, but all had that same subtle luminescence he'd noticed in Kethvar's appearance. They stopped before massive doors that opened silently at their approach, revealing a chamber that was part living room, part command center. The twin princesses were standing near a curved display showing what Marcus assumed was a tactical situation, and, when they turned to face him, he felt his breath catch. The images hadn't done them justice. Princess Lyralii, the one with emerald eyes, moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, but Marcus could see the steel beneath her elegant exterior. Princess Ceralii, her sapphire-eyed twin, had an intensity to her gaze that spoke of a brilliant tactical mind. Both wore simple but elegant clothing that seemed to shift color slightly as they moved. "Your Highnesses," Kethvar said formally, "may I present Marcus Chen of Earth." Lyralii stepped forward first, and Marcus was struck by how her presence seemed to fill the room despite her relatively small stature. "Mr. Chen, we cannot express how grateful we are that you've agreed to help us." "Call me Marcus," he said, then caught himself. "I mean, if that's appropriate. I'm not really sure what the protocol is here." Ceralii smiled, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "Protocol is less important than survival," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality that seemed to resonate in his bones. "We're hoping you can help us with both." "I'll do my best," Marcus replied. "Though I have to admit, I'm still not entirely clear on what I'm supposed to be doing." "Kethvar mentioned something about a bonding process?" The sisters exchanged a look, and Marcus caught something in their expression he couldn't quite identify. Nervousness? Anticipation? "Perhaps we should show him the tactical situation first," Lyralii suggested. "Help him understand what we're facing." Ceralii nodded and gestured toward the display. "The Vortak breached our outer defenses 3 days ago," she explained, and the display zoomed in on what looked like a 3-dimensional map of their realm. "They've consumed 12 of our major population centers and are advancing on the capital." Marcus studied the display, his military training automatically cataloging the information. "What's their pattern of advance? Are they following major travel routes, or is there some other logic to their movements?" "They seem drawn to areas of high life concentration," Lyralii said. "But they're also specifically targeting our military installations and magical research facilities." "Magical research facilities?" Ceralii waved her hand, and the display shifted to show detailed readouts that looked more like scientific data than anything Marcus would have associated with magic. "Magic in our realm is simply a form of energy manipulation that your science hasn't yet discovered." The Vortak seemed particularly interested in our most advanced research. Marcus felt a chill. "They're not just consuming your population. They're learning from you." "Exactly," Kethvar said grimly. "Every facility they overrun makes them stronger, more adaptable. Our conventional forces are useless against them now." "Show me these Vortak," Marcus said. "I need to see what we're dealing with." The display shifted again, and Marcus found himself looking at nightmare fuel. The Vortak looked like shadows given substance, flowing across the ground like liquid darkness. But, as they consumed life force, they began to take on more solid forms, incorporating elements of what they'd devoured into their own structure. "They're hive-minded," Ceralii explained. "Each individual unit shares knowledge with the collective. That's why they adapt so quickly to our tactics." Marcus studied the creatures, his mind already working on the problem. "What about their command structure? Is there a central intelligence directing them?" "We believe so," Lyralii said. "Our scouts have reported a massive presence at the heart of their formation, something our seers describe as a void where hope goes to die." "Cheerful," Marcus muttered. "And your plan is for me to somehow fight these things?" "Not alone," Ceralii said quickly. "The bonding process will enhance your natural abilities and provide you with access to our realm's energy. You'll be stronger, faster, more resilient. And you'll have us." "About this bonding process," Marcus said, turning to face all 3 aliens. "I want details. Real details, not vague references to ancient magic." Kethvar looked uncomfortable. "The bond is intimate, Marcus. It connects your life force to that of the princesses, creating a shared pool of energy and awareness. You'll be able to sense their emotional state, their physical condition, even their general location at any time.
And they'll be able to sense mine?
Yes. Marcus felt his cheeks warm.
How intimate are we talking here?
Lyralei stepped forward, her emerald eyes meeting his directly. The bond doesn't share thoughts or invade privacy, but it does create a connection deeper than most beings ever experience.
It's not unlike a marriage bond, in many ways. A marriage bond?
Marcus's voice came out higher than he'd intended. Lyralei moved to stand beside her sister. In our culture, the royal protector bond is considered equivalent to marriage. The protector becomes, in effect, the consort to both princesses. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly.
Both princesses?
It's necessary for the bond to work properly, HFY explained. The twins share a unique connection themselves, one that's been the source of their strength since birth. For an outsider to protect them effectively, he must be bonded to both.
So when you said marriage was involved? Marcus began.
We understand this is not the custom of your people, Lyralei said quickly.
The bond can be purely functional if that's your preference. There's no requirement for physical intimacy. Marcus looked between the two sisters, trying to process what he was hearing. But, you're asking me to marry both of you?
To save our realm, yes, Lyralei said quietly.
And, possibly yours as well.
The silence stretched for a long moment as Marcus tried to wrap his head around the situation. He'd come here expecting to be a bodyguard, maybe a military advisor. Instead, he was being asked to enter into a mystical marriage with alien princesses to gain the power needed to fight shadow monsters from beyond the void.
This is insane, he said finally.
Yes, Lyralei agreed.
But, it's also our only hope.
Marcus looked at the tactical display again, at the advancing darkness that threatened to consume everything in its path. He thought about Earth, about his family, about the billions of people who had no idea what was coming for them.
If I agree to this, he said slowly, what happens after? Assuming we somehow manage to defeat these Vorthak, what then?
Then, you would be free to choose, Lyralei said. You could remain here as our consort, or you could return to Earth. The bond can be adjusted to allow for separation, though it would weaken all of us considerably.
But, it can be done?
Yes, HFY confirmed, though Marcus caught something in his tone that suggested it wasn't that simple.
Marcus took a deep breath.
The rational part of his mind was screaming at him to run, to demand transport back to Earth immediately. But, the part of him that had made him a good Marine, the part that couldn't stand by and watch innocent people suffer, was already accepting the inevitable.
How long do we have before they reach the capital?
At their current rate of advance, perhaps 18 hours, Lyralei said.
And, this bonding process, how long does it take?
Several hours to complete properly, HFY replied. It cannot be rushed without risking all your lives.
Marcus nodded slowly.
Then, I guess we'd better get started. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and ritual that felt surreal even by the standards of his current situation. The bonding ceremony took place in a chamber deep within the palace, surrounded by crystalline formations that hummed with barely contained energy. Marcus found himself wearing ceremonial robes that seemed to be cut from starlight itself, standing between the twin princesses as HFY chanted words in a language that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his soul. The energy in the room built steadily, and Marcus felt something fundamental shifting inside him. When the ceremony reached its climax, Marcus felt the world explode into sensation. For a moment, he was aware of everything, every life in the palace, every breath of wind across the realm, every beat of his new wives' hearts.
Then, the sensation focused, narrowed, until he was intensely aware of Lyralei and Lyralei in a way that went beyond any of his normal senses.
He could feel their fear, their hope, their determination to save their people. But, underneath that, he sensed something else, something that made his breath catch. They weren't just grateful for his help, weren't just relieved to have a protector. There was warmth there, an affection that seemed far too deep for people who'd just met. The bond is complete, HFY announced, and Marcus realized he was still standing in the ceremonial chamber, though he felt like he'd just traveled across the universe and back.
How do you feel?
Lyralei asked, and Marcus was startled to realize he could sense her concern for him through their new connection.
Different, he said honestly.
Stronger, but also connected.
I can feel both of you.
Lyralei smiled, and the warmth of it seemed to flow through the bond.
And we can feel you.
Your courage, your determination, your willingness to sacrifice for others.
It's quite overwhelming, actually.
Marcus felt his cheeks warm.
I'm not sure I'm as noble as you're making me sound.
The bond doesn't lie, Lyralei said softly.
We can feel who you really are, Marcus.
It's why our seers were so certain you were the right choice.
Before Marcus could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the palace.
Kethvar's expression went grim as he consulted a small device on his wrist.
The Vorthak have accelerated their advance, he announced.
They'll be at our outer defenses within 6 hours. Marcus felt the princess's fear spike through the bond, and his own protective instincts responded immediately. The power flowing through him now felt vast, intoxicating, and he had to fight the urge to charge out and face the enemy immediately. What's our defensive situation? He asked, forcing himself to think tactically. We have perhaps 1,000 soldiers remaining, Lyralei said, her voice steady despite the fear he could feel through their bond.
The palace defenses are strong, but they won't hold forever against the Vorthak.
Then, we need to take the fight to them, Marcus said. Waiting here just gives them time to adapt to whatever defenses you have left.
You want to go on the offensive?
Lyralei asked, and Marcus could sense her surprise through the bond. I want to end this, Marcus replied, feeling the bond amplifying his determination and flowing it back to both sisters. Show me everything you know about their command structure, their weaknesses, anything that might give us an advantage. As they moved back to the command center, Marcus felt the bond settling into place, becoming as natural as breathing. He could sense the princess's locations, their emotional states, even their general health. More importantly, he could feel the power flowing between them, a connection that made him feel capable of anything. The tactical briefing that followed confirmed his worst fears about the Vorthak. They were adaptable, relentless, and seemingly unstoppable. But Marcus had fought impossible odds before, and now he had advantages he'd never imagined. There, he said, pointing to the display.
That's where we hit them. The command nexus?
Lyralei asked, her tactical mind immediately grasping his intention.
It's surrounded by thousands of Vorthak units.
Exactly, Marcus said, feeling his new wife's excitement begin to match his own through the bond. They won't expect a direct assault on their strongest position.
And, if we can disrupt their central command, the rest might become vulnerable.
It's incredibly dangerous, Kethvar warned.
If you're wrong, if the bonding hasn't given you enough power to face their leader.
Then, we die trying, Marcus said simply.
But, if we wait here, we die anyway.
He looked at each of the princesses in turn, feeling their resolve crystallizing through the bond.
Whatever happened next, they would face it together.
The human who'd never expected to marry anyone, let alone alien royalty, was about to lead a desperate assault against creatures of living shadow to save 2 realms. Marcus Chen had always known he'd die in service to something greater than himself. He'd just never imagined it would be for 2 women he'd married an hour after meeting them, in defense of a world that existed only in dreams. But, as he felt the love and trust flowing through the bond from Lyralei and Lyralei, Marcus realized he'd never been more ready for anything in his life. The assault on the Vorthak command nexus began at dawn, though dawn in this realm meant 3 suns rising in sequence, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that would have been breathtaking under different circumstances. Marcus stood at the helm of the last functioning Zephyrian battlecruiser, feeling the twin presences of his wives through the bond as they coordinated the desperate attack from their positions in the palace. Status report, Marcus called out, his voice carrying easily across the bridge despite the chaos of preparation around him. The bond had enhanced more than just his physical capabilities. His senses were sharper, his reflexes faster, and his ability to process multiple streams of information had increased dramatically. All systems operational, reported Captain Zelthek, the ship's commander who had volunteered to serve under the new royal protector despite his obvious skepticism about human tactical doctrine.
Shields at maximum, weapons charged.
The strike teams are in position.
Marcus studied the tactical display, watching the swarm of Vorthack units moving like a dark tide across the landscape below. The command nexus was visible as a massive distortion in reality itself, a place where space seemed to bend inward towards something his eyes couldn't quite focus on. Through the bond, he felt Lyraliai's concern spike. "Marcus, the outer perimeter scouts report the Vorthack are beginning to converge on your position. They know you're coming."
"Good," Marcus replied, both aloud and through the mental connection they now shared.
"Let them come to us." "Seraliai, are the palace defenses ready for Phase 2?
"Ready and waiting," came her response, tinged with determination and fear in equal measure.
"The moment you signal, we'll begin the extraction protocol."
Marcus had spent the 6 hours since their bonding ceremony studying everything the Zephyrians knew about the Vorthack, and he'd come to several disturbing conclusions.
First, the creatures weren't just parasites feeding on life force.
They were scouts for something much worse, something that existed in the spaces between realities.
Second, their apparent vulnerability to unconventional tactics wasn't a weakness but a trap. They wanted their enemies to try desperate gambits, because desperate enemies made mistakes.
But Marcus had one advantage the Vorthack couldn't have anticipated: he wasn't just thinking like a human anymore. The bond had given him access to Zephyrian tactical doctrines and magical theory, while his Earth military training provided perspectives that neither ally nor enemy expected.
"Begin the descent," Marcus ordered.
"All strike teams, initiate simultaneous assault patterns.
Remember, we're not here to win a conventional battle. We're here to create chaos." The ship dropped through the atmosphere like a falling star, its shields flaring as Vorthack energy weapons began targeting them from below. But, instead of the concentrated barrage Marcus expected, the enemy fire seemed almost half-hearted, as if the creatures were more curious than concerned about their approach. That should have been his first warning. The landing zone was a crystalline plain that had once been a major city. Now it was nothing but smooth, black glass that reflected no light, as if the Vorthack had consumed not just the life but the very concept of illumination from the area. Marcus felt his stomach clench as he realized this wasn't just destruction, it was erasure on a fundamental level. "Strike teams Alpha through Delta, move to secure the perimeter," Marcus commanded as they disembarked. "Epsilon team, you're with me for the direct assault on the Nexus." The Zephyrian soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, but Marcus could see the fear in their movements.
They'd been fighting the Vorthack for days, watching their comrades and their world consumed by an enemy that seemed to defy every law of physics and magic they understood. Through the bond, Marcus felt Seraliai's analytical mind working alongside his own, processing the tactical situation and offering suggestions. "The energy readings are wrong," she said, her voice echoing in his mind.
"The Nexus is putting out far more power than our scouts reported."
"It's grown stronger," Lyraliai added, her empathic abilities allowing her to sense the malevolent presence radiating from their target.
"Marcus, I don't think this is just a command center anymore. I think it's become something else."
Marcus studied the distortion ahead of them, watching reality bend and twist around what should have been empty air. Through his enhanced senses, he could perceive layers of existence folding in on themselves, creating a wound in the fabric of spacetime itself. It's not just commanding the other Vorthack, he realized with growing horror.
It's calling to something. Something from outside this reality. Before anyone could respond, the attack began.
The first wave of Vorthack flowed across the crystalline ground like living shadows, but these weren't the mindless parasites the Zephyrians had been fighting. These creatures had structure, purpose, and, worst of all, they seemed to be adapting their forms specifically to counter human military tactics.
"Contact front!"
Marcus shouted, raising the weapon Kethvar had given him, a device that channeled raw life force into destructive energy. The first Vorthack to reach them dissolved under the concentrated beam, but 2 more immediately took its place, their forms already shifting to incorporate some kind of energy absorption capability. Around him, the Zephyrian strike team opened fire with their own weapons, creating a barrier of deadly energy between themselves and the advancing enemy.
But Marcus could see it wouldn't be enough.
The Vorthack weren't just attacking, they were learning, adapting with every shot fired at them. "Fall back to position 2, Marcus ordered, even as his mind raced through alternatives. The conventional assault was already failing, exactly as he'd expected. But failure was part of the plan. Through the bond, he felt both princesses tense as they sensed his intentions.
Marcus, what are you planning? Lyralii asked, her mental voice tight with concern.
Something stupid, he replied, pulling a small device from his belt. The device was Zephyrian technology, but the application was pure human stubbornness.
Ceralii, initiate the extraction protocol in 30 seconds.
Marcus, no, both sisters said simultaneously, but he was already moving. Marcus broke away from the strike team, sprinting directly toward the command nexus. Behind him, he heard Captain Zalthek shouting orders, the sound of weapon fire intensifying as the Vorthak responded to his unexpected charge. The creatures moved to intercept him, flowing across the ground with inhuman speed, but Marcus had advantages they couldn't account for. The bond with the princesses fed him strength and speed beyond human limits, while his military training helped him read their attack patterns and find gaps in their formation. He reached the edge of the distortion field and immediately felt reality begin to shift around him. The air grew thick, sounds became muffled, and his vision started to blur as multiple versions of the same space tried to occupy the same location. But, through the bond, Marcus could feel his wives anchoring him, their combined will keeping his consciousness focused on a single timeline. It was like having two lighthouse beacons in a storm, guiding him through the chaos of fractured spacetime. I can see it, he said, his voice somehow carrying clearly despite the dimensional interference.
The thing they're calling to. It's massive, and it's almost through.
The heart of the Nexus was a Terran reality itself, and, on the other side, Marcus caught glimpses of something that his mind refused to fully process. It was vast beyond comprehension, composed of hunger and malevolence given form, and it was pushing against the barriers between worlds with increasing desperation. The Vorthak aren't invaders, Marcus realized, his understanding shifting as he saw the truth of their situation.
They're refugees.
They're running from that thing, and they're trying to pull it through after them. Then, stopping them won't save our realm, Ceralii said through the bond, her tactical mind immediately grasping the implications.
It will just delay the inevitable. Not necessarily, Marcus replied, activating the device he carried.
If I can collapse the dimensional breach before it fully opens, I might be able to strand them on both sides.
The energy required would be enormous, Lyralii protested. It could kill you.
Marcus felt a strange peace settle over him as he approached the dimensional tear. Through the bond, he could feel his wives' love and fear for him, their desperate desire to protect him even as he worked to protect them. It was the kind of connection he'd never imagined possible, a love that transcended species and circumstance.
Maybe, he agreed.
But, I've got backup power sources.
Marcus, what are you talking about?
Instead of answering, Marcus reached out through the bond, not just to communicate but to draw on the connection itself. The mystical energy that linked him to the twin princesses could be channeled, redirected, used as a weapon against the very forces threatening their world. No, both sisters cried out as they realized what he intended, but it was too late. Marcus plunged the device into the dimensional tear and channeled everything he had through it. His own life force, the power from the bond, even the ambient magical energy of Zephyria itself, all of it focused into a single, desperate gambit. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Reality screamed as the dimensional breach began to collapse, folding in on itself like a house of cards in a hurricane. The Vorthak around him dissolved, their connection to their home dimension severed, but Marcus barely noticed. The feedback from the collapsing breach was tearing him apart from the inside. He could feel his consciousness scattering across multiple timelines, his body beginning to discorporate as the fundamental forces holding him together failed. But, through it all, he felt the bond holding him together. Lyralii and Ceralii were pouring everything they had into maintaining their connection, using their combined will to keep his essence from being scattered across infinite possibilities. Stay with us, Lyralii's voice echoed through dimensions, carrying love and desperation in equal measure.
Don't you dare leave us now. We just found you, Ceralii added, her mental voice breaking with emotion.
We just found someone who could understand us, who could love us despite what we are. Marcus fought to respond, to reassure them, but speaking across dimensional barriers required more strength than he had left. Instead, he sent his feelings through the bond, everything he couldn't put into words. His gratitude for their trust, his amazement at the love he felt from them, his determination to protect them no matter the cost.
The dimensional breach continued to collapse, taking the Vorthak nexus and the threat from beyond with it. But the strain was too much. Marcus felt his grip on consciousness slipping, felt the bond beginning to fray as his life force ebbed away. The last thing he remembered was the sensation of falling through space and time, his wife's voices calling to him across impossible distances, and a strange sense of peace as everything faded to black. Marcus woke up 3 days later in what appeared to be a medical facility designed by someone with a passion for crystals and soft lighting. Every surface seemed to glow with gentle phosphorescence, and the air hummed with energy that made his bones vibrate in harmony. "He's awake," Ceralia's voice said from somewhere nearby, and Marcus felt relief and joy flow through the bond like warm sunlight. "How do you feel?" Lyralia asked, appearing at his bedside with an expression of concern that made his chest tighten. "Like I got hit by a dimensional freight train," Marcus replied, his voice coming out as a rough whisper. "Did it work?" "The breach is sealed," Ceralia confirmed, taking his hand in both of hers. "The remaining Vorthak on our side have become dormant without their connection to the home dimension." "It's over." Marcus tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through every nerve in his body. "What's the damage assessment?" 12 cities were completely consumed, Lyralia said softly, but the population centers we evacuated are intact. "We lost perhaps 30% of our realm, but the rest can be rebuilt." "And the cost?" The sisters exchanged a look that Marcus caught even through his pain-fogged awareness. "The cost," Ceralia said carefully, "is that you nearly died. The healers say you should have died. The only thing that kept you anchored to this reality was the bond. Which brings us to a problem," Lyralia continued. "The bond was damaged in the process. The healers can repair it, strengthen it, but doing so will make it permanent. Irreversible." Marcus processed this information slowly. "And if we don't repair it?" "Then, it will continue to deteriorate," Ceralia said. "Eventually, it will fail completely, and the backlash will likely kill all 3 of us. So my choices are to commit to staying here permanently, or to die anyway." "I'm afraid so," Lyralia confirmed. "We're sorry, Marcus. This wasn't what we promised you." Marcus looked at both women, seeing the guilt and fear in their expressions. Through the damaged bond, he could feel their emotions more clearly than their words, their certainty that he would choose death rather than permanent exile from his homeworld, their heartbreak at the thought of losing him, their desperate hope that maybe, somehow, he might choose to stay. "How long do I have to decide?" "The deterioration is accelerating," Ceralia said. "Perhaps a week before the decision is made for us." Marcus nodded slowly. "I need to think." The princesses reluctantly left him alone, though he could feel their presence hovering at the edge of his awareness through the bond. Marcus stared at the crystalline ceiling and tried to weigh his options. Staying meant never seeing Earth again, never seeing his family, never returning to the life he'd built for himself. But leaving meant dying, and, worse, it meant abandoning 2 people who had trusted him with their lives and their hearts. Through the bond, he could feel their love for him, genuine and deep despite the short time they'd known each other. It wasn't just gratitude or admiration, it was real affection, the kind of connection he'd never expected to find with anyone, let alone with alien royalty. But, was that enough? Could he build a life in an alien realm, married to 2 women he barely knew, no matter how much he cared for them? Marcus spent the next 3 days recovering physically while wrestling with the decision mentally. The palace staff treated him like a hero, and he supposed he was one by any reasonable definition. He'd saved their realm, protected their princesses, and sacrificed everything to do it. The problem was that heroism was a lot easier when you didn't have to live with the consequences afterward. On the 4th day, Kethvar visited him in the medical center. The first advisor looked older, more worn than when Marcus had first met him, but there was also a lightness to his expression that hadn't been there before. "The realm owes you a debt that can never be repaid," Kethvar said formally. "You have given us our future back." "I did what needed to be done," Marcus replied. "The same as anyone would have." "No," Kethvar said firmly. "Not anyone would have charged a dimensional nexus alone, knowing the cost. Not anyone would have sacrificed their connection to their homeworld for the sake of strangers." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What happens to the realm now?" We rebuild, Kethvar said simply. The princesses will rule jointly once they come of age, and their consort will stand beside them as protector and advisor. If they have a consort. Kethvar's expression grew sympathetic. I understand your conflict, Marcus. The choice you face is not an easy one. But perhaps I can offer some perspective. I'm listening.
The bond you share with Lyralii and Seralii is not just magical energy, Kethvar explained. It is a connection of souls, a recognition that transcends species or circumstance. Such bonds are rare, even among our people. To find one that spans different worlds, different forms of life entirely, that is unprecedented. You're saying I should stay. I'm saying that some choices are not really choices at all, Kethvar replied. The bond exists because it should exist, because you and the princesses complete each other in ways that none of you fully understand yet.
The magic simply recognized what was already true. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding. You're saying we were meant for each other?
I'm saying that destiny is not about fate, Kethvar said. It's about recognizing when you've found something worth fighting for, something worth sacrificing for, something worth living for. After Kethvar left, Marcus lay in the crystalline bed and reached out through the bond, feeling for his wife's emotional states. They were in the palace somewhere, trying to give him space while simultaneously being terrified that he would choose to leave them. The depth of their fears surprised him. These were powerful women, heirs to a throne, capable of commanding armies and reshaping their realm. But the thought of losing him left them feeling helpless and lost. Lyralii, Seralii, he called through the bond.
Could you come here? I think it's time we talked. They arrived within minutes, both trying to project calm while radiating anxiety.
Marcus looked at them and realized that somewhere in the past week, these alien princesses had stopped being strangers and started being the most important people in his life. I've made my decision, he said simply. Both sisters tensed, and Marcus felt their fear spike through the bond. They were expecting rejection, preparing themselves for the heartbreak of watching him choose death over exile. I want to repair the bond, Marcus said, and watched relief flood their faces.
I want to stay.
Marcus, Lyralii began, tears starting in her emerald eyes.
Are you certain? Once the bond is repaired, there will be no going back.
I'm certain, Marcus replied, reaching out to take each of their hands.
I've been thinking about what home really means.
I thought it was a place, a planet, a familiar environment.
But I was wrong. What is it then?
Seralii asked softly. Home is where the people you love are, Marcus said. It's where you belong, where you're needed, where you can make a difference. And, right now, that place is here with both of you. The sisters looked at each other, then, back at him, their faces showing wonder and joy and love in equal measure. Besides, Marcus added with a smile, someone needs to teach you proper human military tactics. Your strategic doctrines have some serious gaps. Seralii laughed, the sound like music through the bond.
Are you saying we don't know how to run a proper war?
I'm saying that next time someone threatens this realm, they're going to face more than just Zephyrian magic, Marcus replied.
They're going to face human stubbornness backed by alien technology. That's a combination that can stop just about anything.
The bond repair ceremony took place that evening, in the same chamber where they'd first been joined. But, this time, the energy felt different, less desperate and more celebratory. This wasn't just a magical necessity anymore, it was a choice, a commitment, a declaration of intent to build something new together. As the ceremony reached its climax, Marcus felt the bond settle into place with a solidity that hadn't been there before. The connection with his wives became as natural and permanent as breathing, a part of himself that he couldn't imagine living without. Welcome home, Lyralii said softly as the energy settled around them.
Welcome to the family, Seralii added with a smile.
Marcus looked at his wives, at the alien realm that was now his kingdom, at the future they would build together. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life he chose. And, for the first time since arriving in Zephyria, Marcuschan felt completely at peace. 2 years had passed since Marcuschan had made the choice that changed not just his life, but the fundamental structure of two realms. The palace of Zephyria had become his home in ways he'd never expected, and his role as royal protector had evolved into something far more complex and rewarding than he'd originally imagined. Standing on the crystalline balcony overlooking the capital city, Marcus watched the morning ritual of 3 suns rising in sequence. The rebuilt districts gleamed with an architectural fusion that hadn't existed before his arrival, combining Zephyrian energy manipulation with human engineering principles. The result was a city that seemed to grow from the ground itself while incorporating defensive measures that would make any Earth military engineer proud. "You're brooding again," Lyreliai's voice came from behind him, warm with affection and gentle teasing. "I prefer to call it strategic contemplation," Marcus replied without turning around, though he smiled as he felt her amusement through the bond they now shared. Lyreliai joined them on the balcony, carrying a steaming cup of something that approximated coffee but tasted like liquid starlight. "The council meeting starts in an hour," she reminded him. "Are you ready for the proposal?" Marcus accepted the cup gratefully, taking a sip while organizing his thoughts. The proposal they were referring to would fundamentally change the relationship between Zephyria and Earth, and he wasn't entirely sure how either world would react to what he was about to suggest. "As ready as I can be," he said. "Though I have to admit, this is probably the craziest thing I've ever tried to convince people to do." "Crazier than charging a dimensional nexus single-handedly?" Lyreliai asked, arching one elegant eyebrow. "That was just suicidally brave," Marcus replied. "This is politically suicidal." Through the bond, he felt both his wife's confidence in him, their absolute certainty that he could make even the most outrageous proposal sound reasonable. It was still startling, even after 2 years, how completely they trusted his judgment. The trust wasn't misplaced. In the time since the Vortak crisis, Marcus had proven himself not just as a protector but as an innovative strategist and diplomat. His unique perspective, combining human military doctrine with Zephyrian magical theory, had revolutionized their planetary defense systems. More importantly, his ability to think outside the conventional wisdom of both cultures had solved problems that had stumped the best minds in the realm. "The Earth delegation should be arriving within the hour," Lyreliai noted, consulting a small crystalline device that served as their equivalent of a smartphone. "Ambassador Peterson seems nervous about the whole thing." "He should be," Marcus said with a slight smile. "He's about to learn that humanity isn't alone in the universe, and that one of their own is married to alien royalty." The formal contact between Earth and Zephyria had been Marcus's idea, though it had taken him nearly a year to convince both governments that it was necessary. The Vortak crisis had proven that threats to one realm could easily spill over into others, and Marcus believed that cooperation between worlds was the only way to ensure long-term security. "Are you sure Earth is ready for this?" Lyreliai asked, and Marcus could feel her concern through the bond. She worried about his home world's reaction to discovering they weren't alone, worried about how they might treat him for his choices. "They'll adapt," Marcus said with more confidence than he actually felt. "Humans are remarkably resilient when they have to be." The truth was, Marcus had no idea how Earth would react to learning about Zephyria and the wider universe beyond. The carefully edited reports he'd been sending back through diplomatic channels had prepared them for the possibility of contact, but the reality of alien civilizations was something else entirely. An hour later, Marcus stood in the main council chamber wearing a uniform that combined elements of his old Earth military dress blues with Zephyrian formal wear. The result was something that looked dignified and official while clearly being neither fully human nor alien in origin. The Earth delegation consisted of Ambassador Peterson, a career diplomat who'd been briefed on the basic situation but was clearly struggling with the reality of it, General Harrison, Marcus's former commanding officer who'd insisted on being part of the mission, and Dr. Sarah Chen, Marcus's sister and a xenobiologist who'd volunteered for the assignment the moment she'd learned her brother was involved. "Marcus," General Harrison said formally as the delegation was announced. "Or should I say, Your Highness?" "Marcus is fine, General," he replied, though he noticed the subtle way his wives moved to flank him in a gesture of support. "I'm still the same person who served under your command." "Are you?" Dr. Chen asked, studying him with scientific curiosity. "Because according to our preliminary scans, you're showing energy readings that suggest significant biological modifications." Marcus felt Lyreliai and Lyreliai tense slightly at the implied criticism. Through the bond, he could sense their protective instincts activating, their readiness to defend him against any perceived threat. The bonding process enhanced certain capabilities, he explained calmly. But, the core of who I am hasn't changed. The core maybe, Ambassador Peterson interjected, but your loyalties certainly have. You've essentially defected to an alien power. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as both princesses reacted to the accusation. Marcus felt their anger through the bond, but also their restraint as they waited for him to handle the situation.
I've expanded my loyalties, Marcus corrected. I haven't abandoned Earth. I've simply accepted responsibility for more than one world.
Which brings us to why we're here, General Harrison said, clearly trying to steer the conversation away from political implications.
Your proposal for a mutual defense treaty. The Joint Chiefs are skeptical.
Marcus nodded, having expected that reaction.
Show them the sensor data from the Vortak incursion. Show them the dimensional breach readings.
The universe is a dangerous place, General, and we're stronger together than apart.
Assuming we can trust each other, Ambassador Peterson said. What guarantee do we have that this isn't some elaborate deception? That you haven't been compromised by alien influences? Before Marcus could respond, Cerelii stepped forward. With your permission, Ambassador, I can provide that guarantee. Peterson looked uncertain. How exactly?
The same bond that connects Marcus to my sister and me can be temporarily extended to others, Cerelii explained. Nothing permanent, nothing invasive, but enough to allow you to sense his true intentions and loyalties.
Absolutely not, General Harrison said immediately. We're not submitting to any kind of alien mental manipulation. It's not manipulation, Lyrelii said gently. It's simply sharing truth.
You would be able to feel Marcus's genuine emotions, his real motivations. You'd know beyond doubt that he remains loyal to Earth while also serving Zephyria.
Dr. Chen looked intrigued despite her colleague's obvious reluctance. What would this process involve?
A simple touch connection, Marcus explained.
Nothing permanent, no lasting effects. You'd just be able to sense what I'm feeling for a few minutes.
It's the same process we use for diplomatic negotiations with other realms, Cerelii added. It prevents deception and ensures honest communication. Ambassador Peterson and General Harrison exchanged looks, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. But Dr. Chen stepped forward without hesitation.
I'll do it, she said simply. He's my brother. I need to know if he's still himself.
Marcus felt a surge of gratitude as Sarah approached, though it was mixed with apprehension. The temporary bond would let her feel everything he felt, including the depth of his connection to his wives. He wasn't sure how she'd react to that level of emotional intimacy. Cerelii gently took Sarah's hand and Marcus's, creating a connection that flowed energy between all three of them. For a moment, Marcus felt his sister's consciousness brush against his own, felt her surprise and wonder as she experienced the bond he shared with his wives.
Oh, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with amazement. Oh my God, Marcus. The connection you have with them, it's incredible.
Through the temporary link, Marcus felt his sister understanding not just his loyalty to Earth, but his genuine love for Lyrelii and Cerelii. She could feel how completely he'd committed himself to protecting both worlds, how the bond had enhanced rather than replaced his humanity. He's still himself, Sarah said as the connection faded, turning to address her colleagues.
But he's also more than he was. The bond doesn't diminish his humanity, it expands it.
General Harrison and Ambassador Peterson looked skeptical, but Marcus could see the doubt beginning to creep into their expressions.
Sarah's scientific credibility carried weight, and her obvious amazement was hard to dismiss. The question remains, Ambassador Peterson said, what exactly are you proposing?
Marcus gestured toward the holographic display that dominated the center of the chamber. A formal alliance between Earth and Zephyria. Joint research initiatives, shared defensive technologies, coordinated response to extraterrestrial threats.
And the command structure? General Harrison asked. Joint operation, Cerelii replied.
Zephyrian magical technology combined with Earth military doctrine. Marcus has already begun developing hybrid strategies that leverage the strengths of both approaches.
Show them the simulation, Lyrelii suggested.
Marcus nodded and activated the holographic display, showing a tactical scenario involving the defense of a space station against hostile forces.
The simulation demonstrated how Zephyrian energy shields could be reinforced with human defensive positions, how their transportation magic could be used to rapidly redeploy Earth military units.
This is just a basic example, Marcus explained as the simulation ran. We've identified dozens of ways our technologies and tactics can complement each other.
It's impressive, General Harrison admitted grudgingly.
But implementation would require unprecedented cooperation between two completely different civilizations. Which is why I'm proposing to start small, Marcus said.
A joint research station, maybe in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter.
Neutral territory where both sides can work together without either feeling threatened.
And who would command this station? Ambassador Peterson asked. Marcus smiled. I would.
I'm uniquely qualified to understand both perspectives, and both governments already have reason to trust me.
Trust you? Peterson looked incredulous. You abandoned your post and married alien royalty.
He saved two worlds, Lyraeli said quietly, and there was steel in her voice despite its gentle tone. He sacrificed his connection to his home realm to protect billions of lives, including those on Earth.
And he's offering to serve as a bridge between our peoples, Sorelii added.
To help us avoid the misunderstandings and conflicts that have plagued relations between different species throughout the galaxy.
Dr. Chen looked up sharply. Throughout the galaxy? There are others?
Many others, Marcus confirmed. Some friendly, some hostile, most simply indifferent.
But the universe is becoming more connected, more active. Isolation isn't an option anymore.
The Earth delegation spent several hours touring the palace and the rebuilt capital, seeing firsthand how Zephyrian technology worked and how the fusion of human and alien approaches had created something stronger than either alone. Marcus could see their attitudes shifting as they witnessed the prosperity and security that cooperation had brought. The breakthrough came during the evening meal when General Harrison asked about military applications of Zephyrian energy manipulation. The possibilities are extraordinary, Marcus explained, demonstrating by channeling a small amount of force through his hand to lift a water glass without touching it. Imagine soldiers who could create their own cover, manipulate enemy weapons from a distance, or heal injuries in the field using directed life force.
Could humans learn these techniques? Dr. Chen asked. We're already developing training protocols, Sorelii said.
The bond Marcus shares with us has taught us how human consciousness interfaces with our energy systems. It would require genetic modifications, but they'd be reversible and voluntary.
Genetic modifications? Ambassador Peterson looked alarmed.
Minor ones, Lyraeli assured him. Enhancing natural psychic sensitivity that already exists in human DNA. Nothing that would fundamentally change someone's humanity. Marcus felt the moment when the Earth delegation truly understood what was being offered. Not conquest or subjugation, but partnership. A chance for humanity to take its place among the galactic community as an equal rather than as primitives to be protected or ignored.
We'll need extensive consultation with our respective governments, Ambassador Peterson said finally. This is far beyond what any of us have authority to approve.
Understood, Marcus replied. But I hope you'll recommend moving forward.
The universe isn't going to wait for us to be ready. The negotiations continued for 3 days, with both sides working out preliminary frameworks for cooperation.
Marcus found himself serving as translator not just for languages, but for entire ways of thinking about technology, warfare, and diplomacy. On the final day, General Harrison pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation.
I have to ask, the general said. Do you ever regret it? Giving up your life on Earth for this?
Marcus considered the question seriously. I gave up the life I had planned, he said finally. But I gained a life I never could have imagined. I have a purpose here, a family, a responsibility that spans multiple worlds.
How can I regret that? And you're happy?
Marcus smiled, feeling the warm presence of his wives through the bond as they worked in another part of the palace.
I'm happy, General. Probably happier than I've ever been.
Good, Harrison said gruffly.
You were always one of my best officers. I'd hate to think this was all some elaborate form of capture. No capture, Marcus assured him. Just choice. The best choice I've ever made. The Earth delegation departed with preliminary agreements and a promise to return within 6 months with more authority to negotiate formal treaties. Marcus watched their ship disappear into the void, feeling a strange mixture of nostalgia and anticipation. Do you think they'll approve the alliance? Lyralii asked, joining him at the observation window.
They'll approve it, Marcus said confidently.
They're military people and scientists. They understand the value of what we're offering. And if they don't?
Marcus smiled and pulled both his wives close, feeling their warmth and support through the bond that had become as natural as breathing. Then, we'll find another way. We'll keep building bridges between worlds, keep working toward cooperation instead of isolation. Even if it means choosing between your birth world and your adopted one?
Sorelii asked softly.
There's no choice to make, Marcus replied. Earth will always be where I came from, but Zephyria is where I belong.
You two are where I belong. 6 months later, the joint research station was under construction, with the first mixed human Zephyrian crews already training for deployment.
Marcus stood in the same chamber where he'd been bonded to his wives, now serving as a conference room for the expanded Alliance Council. Representatives from 3 other galactic civilizations sat around the crystalline table, discussing mutual defense agreements and trade partnerships. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save one realm had grown into a coalition that might reshape the entire galaxy. The Andorian Republic has agreed to share their shield technology, reported Ambassador Tvek, the Zephyrian representative to the newly formed Galactic Cooperation Initiative. In exchange for access to human tactical doctrine and our energy manipulation techniques. And the hegemony? Asked Captain Rodriguez, the Earth military liaison.
Still deciding, Tvek replied. But they're intrigued by our hybrid approach to dimensional defense.
Marcus listened to the discussions with half his attention, the other half focused on the bond he shared with Lyralii and Sorelii. They were in another part of the palace, working with a team of human scientists to develop new applications for Zephyrian healing techniques. Through the bond, he could feel their excitement as they made breakthrough after breakthrough, their joy at seeing cooperation between their peoples bearing fruit. It was a feeling he shared completely. Marcus, Admiral Chen said, and it took him a moment to realize his sister was addressing him in her official capacity as head of the Joint Research Initiative. The Vorthan delegation wants to discuss your proposal for standardized dimensional monitoring. Of course, Marcus replied, pulling his attention back to the immediate discussion. The early warning network could prevent another crisis like the Vorthack incursion. As the meeting continued, Marcus reflected on how far they'd all come. 2 years ago, he'd been a lonely technician on a deep space monitoring station. Now he was helping coordinate the defense of multiple star systems while building a life that spanned 2 worlds and 2 very extraordinary women. The marriage that had begun as a desperate necessity had become something he couldn't imagine living without. The bond that had been formed to save a realm had become the foundation for something much larger, a new model for cooperation between species that could change the galaxy forever.
You're thinking deep thoughts again, Lyralii's voice whispered through the bond, warm with affection.
Just appreciating how far we've come, he replied silently. And how far we still have to go, Sorelii added, her mental voice carrying excitement about future possibilities. Marcus smiled as he felt his wife's love and partnership flowing through their connection. He'd come to Zephyria expecting to be a bodyguard and had instead become a bridge between worlds, a catalyst for change that none of them had anticipated. The universe was vast and dangerous, full of threats that could destroy entire civilizations. But it was also full of possibilities, opportunities for growth and cooperation that could make all sentient beings stronger and safer. Marcus Chen, former Earth Marine turned Royal Protector of Zephyria, looked around the conference table at representatives of half a dozen worlds working together to build something unprecedented. Marriage had been the last thing he'd expected when he'd agreed to help protect the twin princesses. But sometimes the most unexpected choices led to the most extraordinary destinies. As the meeting concluded and the various representatives departed for their home worlds, Marcus made his way through the palace corridors toward the research wing where his wives were working. The bond guided him easily, a connection that had become as natural and necessary as his heartbeat. He found them in one of the laboratories, bent over a complex array of instruments that somehow combined crystalline Zephyrian technology with sleek Earth electronics. They were so absorbed in their work that they didn't notice his arrival until he cleared his throat. "Any breakthroughs I should know about?" he asked, moving to look over their shoulders at the data streaming across multiple displays. "We've successfully integrated human neural mapping with our life force manipulation techniques," Lyralia explained, her excitement evident both in her voice and through the bond. "The potential applications for medicine alone are extraordinary." "And the military applications?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from their shared excitement. "Imagine soldiers who could accelerate their own healing," Sorelli said, "or medics who could treat battlefield injuries by directly channeling life force. We're talking about revolution in how we think about human limitations." Marcus studied the data, his enhanced understanding allowing him to grasp concepts that would have been incomprehensible to him just 2 years earlier. The fusion of human science and Zephyrian magic was creating possibilities that neither civilization could have achieved alone. "How long until we can begin testing?" he asked. 6 months for the first prototypes," Lyralia replied. "Though we'll need volunteers from both species to validate the cross-compatibility." "I volunteer," Marcus said immediately. Both his wives turned to look at him, their expressions mixing love with exasperation. "You're not testing experimental enhancements on yourself," Sorelli said firmly. "We need you intact for at least the next few decades." "Besides," Lyralia added with a smile, "you're already our most successful test subject. The bond has enhanced your capabilities far beyond normal human parameters." Marcus felt the truth of that statement through their connection. The bonding process had fundamentally changed him, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. He was stronger, faster, more resilient than any baseline human, but, more importantly, he was connected to something larger than himself. The bond with his wives had taught him that love wasn't just an emotion but a force that could literally reshape reality when properly channeled. Their connection had saved his life during the Vortak crisis and had continued to strengthen him every day since. "Speaking of the bond," Marcus said, settling into a chair near their workstation, "I've been thinking about the implications for the Alliance." "What do you mean?" Sorelli asked, though he could feel her analytical mind already working ahead of his explanation. "If we can adapt the bonding process for diplomatic use, create temporary connections between representatives of different species, it could eliminate the mistrust and miscommunication that have plagued galactic politics for millennia." Lyralia's eyes widened as she grasped the full scope of what he was suggesting. "A universal translation protocol that works on emotional and conceptual levels, not just linguistic ones." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "No more wars started by misunderstanding. No more alliances broken by cultural differences that nobody fully comprehended." "It would require extensive testing," Sorelli said, her scientific mind immediately jumping to the practical challenges. "Different species might react differently to the bonding energy. Some might be incompatible entirely. But, if it works," Marcus said, "it could be the foundation for true galactic civilization. Not just cooperation, but genuine understanding between all sentient beings." The three of them spent the next several hours discussing possibilities, their combined intellects enhanced by the bond they shared. Ideas flowed freely between them, concepts building on each other until they had outlined a research program that could span decades. As the evening wore on and Zephyria's 3 moons rose over the capital city, Marcus realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the momentary pleasure of achievement or success, but the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful with people he loved completely. "Do you ever miss it?" Lyralia asked softly, her empathic abilities picking up some nuance in his emotions. "Your old life on Earth?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things," he said finally. "I miss the simplicity sometimes, the certainty of knowing exactly who I was and what was expected of me. But I don't miss the loneliness." "You were lonely?" Sorelli asked, and Marcus could feel her surprise through the bond. "Profoundly lonely," he admitted. "I had a career, colleagues, acquaintances, but no one who really understood me. No one I could be completely honest with about who I was and what I wanted from life." Through the bond, he shared those feelings, let them experience the isolation he'd lived with for years before coming to Zephyria. In return, he felt their own memories of loneliness, the burden of royal responsibility that had kept them apart from their peers, the weight of knowing that most people who showed them affection were really interested in their status rather than themselves. "We were all lonely," Lyralei said softly. "Until we found each other. The bond didn't create our connection," Seralei added. "It just revealed what was already there, what was always meant to be." Marcus pulled both his wives close, feeling their warmth and love surrounding him like a protective shield against the uncertainties of the universe. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever threats emerged from the void between stars, they would face them together. The human who had never expected to marry anyone had found himself bound to two extraordinary women in a connection that transcended species and circumstance. The soldier who had dedicated his life to protecting others had discovered that sometimes the greatest protection came from allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to trust completely in the strength of shared love. As they made their way through the palace toward their private chambers, Marcus felt the bond humming between them like a perfectly tuned instrument. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations, new opportunities to build bridges between worlds. But tonight, he was exactly where he belonged, with the two people who had changed his life in ways he was still discovering. The universe was vast and full of wonders and terrors in equal measure. But Marcus Chen, royal protector of Zephyria and bridge between Earth and the stars, faced the future with absolute confidence. After all, he had backup.